In a man, every day there is a cyclical behavior in terms of their testosterone, but generally on a day-to-day level, a lot of these sort of underwriting contributors to mood are pretty consistent. In females, we're talking about women who are still going through the menstrual cycle. Over that whole period, there is a completely different cycle.
Welcome to the Mindfulness Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Fifeson. We're an official media partner for the Wonderland Miami 2023 convention, the conference. And we're pleased to offer our listeners a 20% discount using the mindfulness code Mindfulness20 when you register. Today's special guest is Dr. Grace Hopley, Blest-Hopley, a neuroscientist and chief scientific officer at NW Pharma Tech. Dr. Blest-Hopley is also a research director at Heroic Hearts Project and the founder of Hystelica, a community-based focused on understanding women's biology for safe and effective psychedelic use. We'll be discussing Dr. Blest-Hopley's exciting research on the therapeutic potentials of psychedelic substances, her work with the Heroic Hearts Project to support combat veterans with mental health challenges, and her efforts to promote a better understanding of women's biology in relationship to psychedelics. All right. Grace Hopley, how are you? Blest-Hopley, how are you?
That's all right. You'll get it in a minute, Keith.
I will. I should have had some cannabis before we started. I think I'd be more in the flow.
I don't know. There's some reasonable evidence on recall that might suggest otherwise. But Keith, wonderful to be here with you. Very much looking forward to our conversation.
Well, great. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about what you're up to. I know that you've got quite a bit of a background in research with cannabinoids and with cannabis. We've talked about that before, but you also became interested in researching the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. Can you talk about your journey and, what led you here and maybe what you might be talking about down in Wonderland too, how it all sort of came together, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots to unpack. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I guess my initial interest in psychedelics came about when I was doing my undergraduate degree. To be completely candid and honest with you, I noticed a few things in what we perhaps would describe the naturalistic environment that I personally found very, very interesting. And at the time, they perhaps weren't something I could go and speak to my professors about. But during my undergraduate years and going to student parties and similar things, I noticed that in a number of my friends who were suffering from mental health problems, namely depression, that on a couple of occasions they had taken substances such as ketamine and psychedelics. And within moments, I noticed instant improvements in their condition, some of which lasted, some of which was a catalyst for their eventual recovery from some of those conditions. And that stuck with me as a sort of young 21-ish year old scientist, generally inquisitive about the world, but generally sort of thought, no, drugs are bad, mustn't ask any more questions.
Just say no, yeah.
Absolutely. So then cut forward to my master's degree and started to learn a little bit more about the brain and how it works and how we understand how many of these mental disorders come about. And it was at that time that a lot of the original work that was beginning to start to be published out of places like Johns Hopkins and Imperial. During my PhD, I then obviously started avidly reading more and more about this. My PhD was all based around cannabis and cannabinoids. and how they affect people and how they can be detrimental, but also used in therapeutic ways. And at that time, Imperial College completed their fMRI study in imaging the brain on psilocybin. And at the time, I was also completing an fMRI study imaging the brain on cannabis. And so really, really started deep diving at that point on what the science was out there. On completion of my PhD, I then went to become a postdoc researcher at King's College, but then sort of slightly looking to expand out of the cannabis world and towards psychedelics, which I just saw as incredibly interesting and just with such potential as a field and potential as a therapeutic. I then started to get involved with the research. That initially started when I reached out to the Heroic Hearts Project. The reason that particular charity stood out to me was at the time I had an awful lot of friends who were serving in the military. I myself had joined the military reserve and was going through my training. And so it seemed like this incredible sort of Venn diagram of where I needed to be in my life. It was a charity looking to do really amazing work with these incredibly powerful substances, namely psychedelics, to treat military veterans for the psychological trauma that they were now facing as a result of their service. So that was sort of end of 2020. I then threw myself into that and have worked with the charity now for 2.5 years with various different sort of projects and pieces of research to sort of try and understand what we're able to achieve using these substances. And then to bring you onto the story, which was how I came to then found Hystelica at the start of this year, was again through a number of sort of personal stories that I was coming across from females who were kind of saying, well, I took this and then this happened. And then as again, scientific sort of brain of mine, overworking, overthinking as always, saying, well, why did that happen? That's pretty interesting, right? So went and started delving into the science, trying to get under the hood and realizing there was nothing there, realizing that we just really don't have an understanding of how these substances may work in the female body, and further than that, how mental disorders really work within female bodies and other parts of female biology that aren't fully understood. And so completely and utterly shocked at that fact, began sort of running around all my academic friends saying, do you know that there's no studies on this? And over a year devised a plan that, well, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? And so at the start of 2023, I founded Hystelica. And I'm very, very pleased to tell you, you're actually the first person I think I have been able to say we've now had a research proposal approved through King's College London to conduct a piece of research. Thank you very much. That's going to be asking sort of females about their psychedelic use and how it might be affecting them in their biology. But maybe that's something I can go into more detail later on.
Yeah,
but anyway, I hope that's sort of giving you a general story of why I'm here.
That's wonderful, and you're going to be speaking at Wonderland as well, right?
Absolutely, yes. On the exact subject of female biology and psychedelics.
So when we talk about female biology, it's the biology, the physiology, the neurology, and your research is going to be looking at all of those areas and really what the impact is based on the female body. So we talked a little bit about this before the show, but can you just sort of give me the highlights or the lowlights as it relates to the differences? Obviously, women have their cycle, the biology, the physiology is very different. And I do believe the neurology is also different because women seem to be much more emotionally literate. So I kind of attribute that to sort of even though the studies prove otherwise, a bridge between the left and the right hemisphere, whereas men don't necessarily have that. Women, maybe it's socialization, I don't know. But besides that, what are your views on that? Maybe you can give some insights.
Yeah. I think there's a huge aspect of social and cultural norms that come into play when we think about the way that women and men differ in terms of their behaviors. But when we think about this on a neurological level, and the way that I'm thinking about this in terms of, let's think about this, let's frame this as an aspect of how would, say, a big dose of a psychedelic perhaps being administered in a clinical aspect.
Let's say 5 grams of psilocybin, superdose, heroic dose,
Something like that. Say we're going to take a man and a woman through a process with 5 grams of psilocybin or something like that for the treatment of depression or something. Now, in a man, every day there is a cyclical behavior in terms of their testosterone, but generally on a day-to-day level, the way that they're functioning, the way that their brain is functioning, the way that a lot of these sort of underwriting contributors to mood, etc., are pretty consistent. There is some cycling throughout the day, but they're pretty consistent on a day-to-day aspect. In females who are, we're talking about women who are still going through the menstrual cycle, over that whole period, there is a completely different cycle. You've got the start of the month when you've got estrogen ramping up, the middle of the month when you have release of ovulation and you have high levels of testosterone, and the end of the month when you have increasing levels of progesterone. Well, let's look at what all those 3 hormones do in the brain. They all act as some sort of neurosteroid to alter the way that different receptors bind and different systems within the brain work. So for instance, there's very good evidence to show that when progesterone is very high in females, so take that time just before your period, for instance, and the high levels of progesterone then alter the way that GABA receptors work. GABA is the thing that gets released when we have a drink of alcohol or whatever. It's it's an inhibitory, relaxing, anxiety reducing system. But the way that progesterone alters this binding in that particular system means that things like intrusive thoughts are much higher at periods when progesterone is very high because of the effect that it has on these systems. Let's now take that back to what we were talking about at the start. You've got a man and a woman walking into a clinical setting.
Right.
That man walks in on October the 3rd, October the 5th, October the 28th. His sort of neurochemistry is similar, that might suggest, given the same preparation and other things, he would have a similar time. Let's now take the female going into that situation. Her neurochemistry is going to be different at those 3 different time points. Well, surely that's going to play into her mindset. What do we know is incredibly important in these types of therapies? Set and setting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So so should we not be considering that as an important factor, or at least a point of considerable interest in terms of developing clinical programs when we're talking about treating women and women who are still young enough to be going through the menstrual cycle?
So let me ask you, it sort of brings up a whole a whole series of kind of thought processes in my mind. Like, I might bring it to taking flight, looking at all the gauges, and looking at your hormone levels at any particular point. Because if the hormone levels are fluctuating, and like a flight simulator, not every flight is going to be. You'd like to have at least some of the gauges being the same along a certain period of time. Again, mood, what time of the month it is, all of that might be very different. So you're saying that for a man, if your gauges or if your hormone levels are fairly static from a period of time at the beginning of the month to the end of the month, if you're taking a psychedelic, chances are you're not going to be, hyper or hypo, that there are a lot of things that might happen neurologically, but, from a physiological viewpoint, that's pretty stable. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I hear on the female side is that certainly based on the time of the month, based on your physiological, hormones, different things that are happening within the body, those being the stability, the container, the self-container, that depending upon the time of the month, taking a psychedelic could be very, very different for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Comparatively. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, comparatively. Mm-hmm. I have sort of looked at length, and we at Hystelica have been doing a lot to try and kind of review what is available, and not just within the scientific literature, but within where I believe a lot of the knowledge is currently held within the wider community of people who've been using these substances for a long time, to try and really understand what that looks like in practice. There are some communities
that I imagine is going to be what are we measuring? The question is what are you measuring?
Yes, absolutely, because it's very, very difficult, because also every female is very different right. in the way that they present in terms of their hormonal profiles, and also every month is slightly different. This is why we don't know very much about what women's cycles look like in terms of their interaction with almost all healthcare. Because speaking as someone who now works in companies that look at doing clinical trials and things, how on earth do you make a meaningful assessment of the females within your trial who may all be at a different point in a different scale of their cycle? And all of those cycles might look very different. So exactly how do we measure this? I think in the initial sense, it's going to have to be in a slightly less than ideal broad brush approach, kind of saying, okay, let's say a cycle's about this long, and we can cut it into 3 or 4 different parts, and then we'll look at outcomes from there.
Wow.
But I think going forward, we are coming into a world that has the technology that will help us out. I think wearable tech and things like that mean that you can track people's cycles a hell of a lot better, which means that we can then just sort of use that data to understand how we would track where people are in their cycle may affect either their trip at the time or their outcome. In terms of efficacy for it as a clinical treatment.
Well, it's so interesting because, there's so many other factors that really contribute to that, right? I know the fact is that when I go to the doctor and I get my blood pressure taken, I know that my blood pressure is going to be a lot higher than it would be if I took it at home. So there is that quality of safety. The quality of, and that really is where we get into, you have the mindset certainly, and that is determined by your physiology and your neurology and all of the things that you might do from a presencing viewpoint or an intention viewpoint. And then you've got the setting, which in a lot of cases can really contribute to what's going on in your body, how is your heart racing, or how is your physiology, changing while you're literally sitting there waiting for the doctor to draw blood. I mean, these things, the cortisol levels are up, something, hormones are up, there's fight or flight, there's a whole bunch of other things that could be happening. So you're really looking to, measure this. And I think, all things, other things being, stable, which is what you want, I think, in a scientific research environment, the conditions are the same, from person to person, and so on and so forth. It's very exciting to think about, being able to go ahead and give people a sort of a map, give women a map, which might be a different map than the men have, in terms of their journey. Yeah.
Well, it's incredibly exciting, and hopefully it's going to be, somewhat engaging to be one of the people standing up and saying this needs to be done. We're all very lucky to be here at the dawn of a new medical era, particularly in the world of psychiatry, in not only how we treat, but how we understand what a lot of the disorders that we're now looking to use psychedelics for look like. Psychedelics have rewritten the rule book on how we understand how underlying trauma goes on to be a contributing factor to not just mental but physical health problems. But in that, I also like to think that we can be at the start of saying, well, okay, well, if we're going to be a whole new sphere for medical health in terms of this, what psychedelics can do, well, then we absolutely need to be making sure that we are doing it properly for women. We've had, up until incredibly recently, no requirement for women to be involved in clinical trials.
Yeah, I hear that women weren't really involved in clinical trials until maybe the 90s, which is which was something.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. And then we see this sort of continuous treating of women by the medical sphere as though they are little men. Well, they're not. Right. They're not. They've actually got a whole other cyclical environment going on inside them that is interacting with many other major functional parts of the body. And because it's very difficult and very expensive to understand, it hasn't been done, but that's no reason now that it shouldn't be. We have the technology, and we definitely have the appetite for it. And in this new world of psychedelics, I think it would be a dreadful, dreadful shame if we were to do what all of the other medical world has done prior, and not take women's biology seriously in the understanding and development of new treatments.
Dr. Blest-Hopley, you are an inspiration. Thank you for doing the work.
I try.
Seriously, it's really great. Now, I know that you're doing some work with the Heroic Hearts Project, and I'd like to talk about that. As you well know, I'm a healthcare ambassador with the Heroic Hearts Project, and they're just doing great work. And I'd like to see more of that work, honestly, being done in the U.S. or certainly onshore, rather than having to take people offshore. I think the VHA should be covering all of these, the cost for all of these journeys, because it really is about mental health and wellness. And I'm wondering, looking at the Heroic Hearts Project and your support of veterans and mental health challenges, what are you doing there, and what kind of challenges are vets dealing with, personally or otherwise?
First of all, 100% agree with you. I what we have largely done at Heroic Hearts has been to take veterans out to psychedelic retreats, and these have all been, of course, legal in the jurisdictions for which they've been completed. But that means that up until this point right now, they have all been outside of the US. And so you are asking people who are quite often in psychological distress to sort of, right, okay, well, you can get better, but now you need to get on a plane and fly down and go into the jungle in Peru before we can help you. Very pleased to tell you that obviously that is slowly edging forward, and we should be having our first Heroic Hearts project retreat go ahead on US soil, potentially by the end of this year. Which will be a really big moment for us, and hopefully a marker of many, many more similar retreats to come on US soil. The charity itself, its primary aim, as I say, is to take military veterans through psychedelic retreat programs. You mentioned yourself, you're an ambassador of the program. One of the great things that we are able to do at Heroic Hearts is have these sort of ambassadors around us who are from the psychedelic space, who support us, but we also have some who kind of come from within. They're veterans who have often been through the program themselves, who then move into becoming ambassadors for the program, or coaches to the program, or just alumni of the program. And within that, we create a community, we create a support group, we create a network that Heroic Hearts retreat attendees or alumni can go to for advice or support, which I believe is a really, really fundamental part to helping these people to get better, to improve,
right. The community and the networking and the brother 100%. And sisterhood, right? I mean, isn't that beautiful? Yeah.
So my role is to essentially wrap research programs around all of the operations that we do at Heroic Hearts, so that we can collect as much data as possible about our operations. That not only sort of serves us in terms of letting us know, are we doing a good job or not? Are we actually achieving the aims that we've set out here to help these people? And I'm very pleased to tell you, all of the research that we've collected so far very much supports that we are. The second part is, of course, so that we can put out there published science that says, hey, this is working. This is not just working. This is working at, an almost 2-3 times better effect than the gold standard treatment that's available in terms of a 6-week CBT course or similar. And try and nudge, push the needle a bit on getting the legislators and the powers that be to see that these treatments are incredibly effective, and incredibly effective, particularly in this population. PTSD in combat veterans, in military veterans, is one of the hardest to treat. It's quite often a very complex form of PTSD. It's quite often underpinned by childhood trauma. It's very often also underpinned by physical trauma to the head, which primes the brain to develop psychological disorders. And as a result, they really struggle to get good results out of what are the current treatments available. And sometimes it takes something big, like a huge, 5-gram psilocybin trip to, get them to engage, to break through a lot of that very apathetic
and the SSRIs numb people down. The trauma, being able to go ahead and be in your body, being able to go ahead and have some effect, in terms of happiness, sadness, or whatever. I mean, those things for many people who are either suicidal ideation or, treatment-resistant depression or, what have you. I mean, it's there. And, the work that is being done is fantastic. Just great.
Yeah, and you know, Heroic Hearts Project is not alone. There's a number of other great institutions that have been focusing on military veterans within this sort of field of psychedelic therapies. And military veterans do really feel. I mean, I was at the conference in Denver in June at a banquet held for veterans, and there was just this incredible feel like it will be this population who potentially makes the big breakthrough in terms of this becoming a mainstream treatment, this becoming acceptable to conservative minds who perhaps wouldn't have listened otherwise.
Excellent.
So yeah.
So when you start taking a look at the research and the work that you're doing along that line, we had talked about, you know, families and working with, and I'm going back to the Hystelica research that you're doing, the work that you're doing with women. How does that apply, and does it apply to some of the work that you're doing with the Heroic Hearts Project?
Yeah. So well, the first one, I guess, is something I would like to start looking at more down the line, and that is the fact that female military veterans are twice as likely to suffer from PTSD as their male counterparts. So there's definitely a higher need amongst women veterans, and also one that's slightly more specific. A lot of that PTSD is often associated with sexual trauma as opposed to combat trauma. So that's something that I think is very interesting in terms of how we think of female PTSD. But a project that we're working on right now is in collaboration with the Hope Project, which is a wonderful charity that has been set up to support the spouses and partners of combat veterans who have been killed or injured. And we are developing a program that will research the efficacy of putting them through similar psychedelic research, psychedelic retreat programs. But within that, we are looking more at things that we think will be more specific to that particular cohort. And part of that is around things like sort of signs of secondary PTSD as a result of the sort of trauma of what has happened to their partner, but also around the effects of sort of connectedness with the family unit and how that is altered through going through the psychedelic retreat program.
Wouldn't that be wonderful to be able to heal not only the individual, but to heal all of the people that they come in contact with? Because we do know with vets, suicides are up, family crisis is up. You know, often it's complicated with, you know, alcohol and, you know, violence and, you know, things along that line, not only to self, but to others. And, you know, that's it's criminal that we can't have the VHA cover a lot of this, and the research and the work that you're doing on the individual as well as the family is so needed to go ahead and then, you know, validate that so that the support is there. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And to understand what psychedelic therapies sort of look like in the family setting, in terms of how it can affect multiple members of a family, and how it kind of basically how it's very good to sort of acknowledge that trauma and that stress that is genuinely felt by spouses and partners of military veterans, and to understand how that trauma can be passed from the veteran to their partner, and understand how, again, psychedelics could be used as a tool to deal with that.
And, you know, I mean, trauma has become sort of like, you know, the love word. You know, it's kind of like I love chocolate, or I love this, or, you know, people talk about trauma. Oh, I had a traumatic childhood, you know, but, you know, and I talk to people about, you know, explicit, implicit trauma, and that it's invisible, and you don't, it can be passed along from, it's intergenerational. There are ways of passing it from one generation to the other. And I'm really, it's like one of those things that we are born into it. We're born into a world of trauma, and yet we don't necessarily stop the craziness. There's so do you see, in terms of looking at psychedelics and looking at the use of them as we go forward, do you see sort of a new frontier ahead, being in the medical field and the research area? Like, what do you see ahead of us? I know you're in the UK, so it's okay. I also heard that laughing gas was just made illegal in the UK. Yeah, so I'm.
Yeah, that happened a couple of years ago. There's some good evidence that stuff's not that good for you.
well, okay, I'm good for that, and I am for wisdom medicines that help promote wisdom and consciousness, not for the other stuff that sort of takes you into the loony bin.
Oh, absolutely. And that idea of expanding with wisdom and consciousness, I think psychedelics are merely a catalyst in that regard. There's many ways one can do that. When we talk about sort of trauma and understanding trauma and how it sort of gets stored in the body and how it remains with us, it is stored within our subconscious mind in many ways. Within that sort of story we tell ourselves about ourselves, and then that becomes an interplay with everything we then go forward in our lives and do, and that's why I personally see psychedelics and breath work and yoga and long walks and running marathons and all of these other things. They're all just ways that we can go in, speak to the subconscious, tell it it's safe, tell it that traumatic stressor, etc., actually isn't what we have coded it as in our brain. And that's how I see the therapy of psychedelic therapies being incredibly useful in that trauma piece. In terms of how do I see this going forward, how do I see this sort of developing and blossoming and becoming, the
research,
the treatments of the
clinical
future.
use, just in general, what's your view?
Yeah, I genuinely believe that we will go past the idea of psychedelics being this breakthrough for mental health treatment and start seeing psychedelics as a breakthrough for health treatment. And the reason being that the majority of, if you look at people with cardiovascular diseases and autoimmune disorders, one of the high, they all have really, really high associations with traumas. A lot of autoimmune diseases are, for instance, very highly presented in women, much more than in men, and a lot of them are flared up as a result of external stresses in our environments that are nothing to do with how your gut is reacting to what you've just eaten. Actually, your gut feels really bad because you've just got that email from your boss and now you're feeling really unsafe, and that's why you're now doubled over with a stomach cramp, because you've changed the way that your brain is perceiving your safety. And that unsafe feeling, that then starts to get fed into the body in terms of our immune system, in terms of our cardiovascular system, in terms of everything. So if we can learn how we can tell the body you're safe, you're fine, then we're going to see a huge reduction in all of these physical health problems. I think there's further also great evidence going on with psychedelics, and this is one of the things that we've made a real priority in terms of one of our research aims at the Heroic Hearts Project, is traumatic brain injuries. There's really good evidence coming out now, beyond the psychomimetic effects of psychedelics, the transient experience and all of that. Right. Let's just come down to the sort of cellular biology of it. The alterations that we see in terms of reduced...
You're talking about like neurogenesis, the ability to...
Absolutely.
Really
increase neuroplasticity, increase neurogenesis, reducing neuroinflammation. These are all pathways that, the absolute opposite looks like diseases that come about as a result of head traumas, that come about as a result of neurodegenerative disorders. I think there's going to be breakthroughs in the next few years where psychedelics can be applied to those such things, which I think will be incredible. And that's what I hope. I also think, obviously, there's a lot of aspects of female health where there are areas that are not very well understood in terms of what these disorders are in women. A lot of sort of premenstrual disorders, for instance, are not very well understood. And we're now seeing that psychedelics could be very good tools to deal with things like endometriosis, premenstrual depressive disorders, and similar things to that.
Wow. So the opportunity to really, take your hands off the wheel, move away from the vehicle, take a look at what is going on in your life. I talk about in mindfulness, I talk about the ability with mindfulness and breathing and just to be able to regulate yourself, to move into the window of tolerance, to get that recognition. You get the stimulus, you get a response. So what mindfulness does is it gives you that little buffer to, look at the stimulus, have the recognition, and then make a different choice. And everything that I hear you talking about, certainly in terms of mind, body, the interconnectedness and the ability to, from a physiological or biological or neurological viewpoint, really points to more wisdom and better health. So, yeah.
You just reminded me, Keith, there of an old favorite phrase of mine. Between a stimulus and a response is a space, and in that space is your choice to choose.
Absolutely.
Your choice to choose mindfulness, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. Make a different choice, and if you change your choices, then you change the story and the trajectory of your life and the impact that you have on all people. So wouldn't it be nice to make different choices?
Yeah, absolutely. But in mindfulness, I think sometimes we kind of say, mindfulness, it's a bit of a sort of word that we kind of think doesn't really mean anything. But if you take a moment to breathe, to stop, to really breathe and connect, your physiology changes.
Right.
The hormones being sent around your body change. The way that your blood is being pumped around your body changes. The way that your brain is working changes. This is not just a bit of a wishy-washy thing. You can make incredibly meaningful change in the way that you feel right now by stopping and taking 5 deep breaths.
Right. So I would invite everyone to do that right now. And everyone who's listening, certainly you can take 5 deep breaths. Maybe a count of a 4 and a 4 and a 4, and just like relax and chill a little bit. We all need to do that, right? So
absolutely.
So let me ask you, Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, you're a neuroscientist and you've done some research. How would people get a hold of some of the research that you've done, and maybe maybe find out some of the work that you're doing with the Hystelica project?
Yeah. So Hystelica is please find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, otherwise visit our website. We will be launching our survey, which is for understanding what the effects of large doses of psychedelics may do to women. That's open to women of all ages who have ever taken a large psychedelic dose. So please visit our website and take part in that survey if that applies to you. Heroic Hearts Project, we are all over social media, generally appearing at any decent psychedelic conference near you. And you can contact us via our website and make any kind donations via there if you should so will. I myself, I'm not hugely available online. I'm far too busy doing meaningful science for any of that. But if you really do want to find me, please do add me on LinkedIn. I always love chatting with people who come to me with interesting ideas about the psychedelic space and what can be done there. So I look forward to hearing from any of you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being a part of the Mindfulness Experience podcast and for taking the time. I look forward to seeing you and meeting you at the Wonderland 2023 Miami convention.
Yes, that's the lot. If you really, really want to see me, you should come to Wonderland for the 11th of November and see me on a panel on women's health and psychedelics, where I'll be saying much, much more than I have had time to on this podcast, and going hopefully a lot deeper into a subject that is fascinating me at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, for joining us today and sharing your insights on the exciting field of psychedelic research. As always, we appreciate our listeners listening to the Mindfulness Experience podcast. Don't forget to register for the Wonderland Miami 2023 conference using our exclusive discount code Mindfulness20 and follow us on social media for more updates and news in mindfulness and mental health. Until next time, stay mindful.